Hello, my name is Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to Common Grounds. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Common Grounds is a series where we bring together one Republican leader and one Democratic leader to talk about how we find common ground on an important issue of the day. We are so pleased to be able to present this series to you in partnership with our friends at Compass Coffee. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Compass Coffee, it's a great coffee establishment in DC, expanding out into the Mid-Atlantic region, founded by two former Marines who share our commitment to seeing our country's leaders come together and solve our nation's problems. Of course, one of the problems on the top of everyone's minds today is immigration. It's befuddled Washington for years, but we're all looking and counting on our elected leaders to come together with a solution. Today, we're honored to be joined by two newly elected members of Congress, Representative Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina, and Representative Maria Elvira Salazar, a Republican from Florida, who are going to share their expertise and their knowledge when it comes to getting immigration reform done. So with that, Congresswoman, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we are here today to talk about immigration, but we call it Common Grounds as kind of a play on words, finding common ground between the two political parties, but also knowing that coffee has been one of those things that does bring people together. We gather around, and these days, the virtual coffee pot. And it seems that sometimes it allows us to solve the world's problems. But before we get to the world's problems, let's start with coffee. Are you all coffee drinkers? If so, how do you take it? Representative May was first with her hand up. Tell us how you like your coffee.
I am definitely a coffee drinker. I like my coffee strong with sweetener, and I have to say some milk.
All right. Representative Salazar.
Well, you know, I'm Cuban American first generation. And the Cuban coffee is it's a staple in our community and around the country. So I am definitely a coffee drinker, but not the typical American coffee. We take the one that is like a bomb and does not let you sleep. So I take it with just a lot of sugar, because that's another component that is very much part of my culture. Cuban coffee with a lot of sugar.
With a lot of sugar. I feel like I may have to give that a try. I just drink my Compass coffee black. Well, we are here today to talk about immigration. And it often seems that when you read the news, it sounds like nothing's ever getting done on these issues. That's actually not true. Both of you came together recently, and you both voted for the American Dream and Promise Act. Legislation that recently passed the House of Representatives dealing with dreamers. I suspect, like every piece of legislation, no one thought it was absolutely perfect, but you both found a way to support it despite coming at it from different political parties. I'm wondering if you can just each explain in your own words why you ended up supporting the bill and why you think that it was a step forward in at least addressing one aspect of our immigration challenge. And Representative Manning, we'll start with you.
Sure. Look, I was very much aware of the Dreamers Act when it was enacted several administrations ago. And I was actually surprised that so many dreamers came out of the woodwork and trusted our government by revealing themselves and getting their information to the government so that they could register as dreamers and pursue the education that they all wanted. Now, we have to remember that dreamers are people who were brought here as young children. They certainly had no choice in coming here. And for the vast majority of them, this is the only country that they've ever known. Dreamers have worked hard. They've gone to school. Many of them have served in our military. They've served as first responders. They have helped take care of people during this pandemic. And I think allowing them the pathway to citizenship is absolutely the right thing to do. The Dreamers Act, I believe, also dealt with people who came here on temporary protected status. And same is true. We want those people to stay here and to have a pathway to citizenship.
Representative Salazar, how did you approach this legislation?
Well, and I thank you very much for wanting to touch upon this topic, which is very difficult. Everybody is very afraid of immigration. And I'm terrified that we are not going to be trying to solve it. The Dreamers Act is just the beginning, but for me, it's just a fallacy. Dreamers are just a little number of people in a big sea of 11 million immigrants who have been waiting for some type of legality. When we talk about the Dreamers, and everybody is really enthusiastic that those poor kids that their parents brought are going to have some type of legality, I can only think of the parents. Yeah, so that means that we're going to save the kids, but we're going to force the parents to abandon the children in order to save them. And you see, that's when things start getting thorny. And then what about those who are not Dreamers, or the parents of the Dreamers, the DAPA or the DACA or the Dreamers or the TPS, and thousands and millions of other people who have been here for more than 5 years, people who have paid taxes, who have American children that are still not Dreamers because they were born here. So what are we going to do with them? That's the real answer. And that's the real question that I don't find answers to. So I would love to be able to dive into that during our conversation. Dreamers is just the beginning. It's really nothing in comparison to what we need to do.
Yeah, and I do wonder, so many in DC and those who follow and care about immigration reform kind of feel maybe burned is the right word, kind of by the past experiences of what was called comprehensive immigration reform. It even gave comprehensive. I didn't know comprehensive could be a bad word, but it gave comprehensive the idea almost of a bad name. And so there's this thought that maybe starting with one topic can lead to discussions about the other aspects of it. Representative Salazar, as you just did, starting there and kind of building out. Representative Mann, is that the way you see it? That obviously this is one step, but we have to build out and solve those thornier issues?
Absolutely. And we voted on two immigration bills a couple of weeks ago, but there is a third bill that we are considering that I'm actually working on that would be the kind of comprehensive immigration reform that we have been hoping for since the last comprehensive immigration bill, which was passed in 1986. And when you think about how our economy has changed, how society has changed, how the world has changed since 1986, it makes you realize how long overdue our immigration reform is. Now, I have been working on this Us Citizenship Act, which is the broader bill, to add even more things to it, because I think it's a great start, but it still doesn't have everything we need to have the kind of immigration reform we need that's not only good for people who have been here waiting for immigration reform for years, but it's the right thing to do for the American economy.
Let me ask both of you, without revealing confidences of your colleagues, because I know members of you talk to your colleagues all the time, and those private conversations are a lot different often than the public conversations. But without revealing those confidences, do you, in your conversations with your colleagues about immigration reform, both within each of your parties and across the aisle, do you find that there are areas that keep coming up and you're like, gosh, we're closer to agreement than I thought we were, or at least than the public thinks we are? Are there any of those that stand out to you, those type of areas? Representative Salazar, I'll let you go first.
Well, I think that the first thing we need to talk about is the border. And that's when we have a big problem, and that's when we have the biggest differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. We got to change the immigration laws. We have to change the asylum laws. We have to change the way we encounter the whole immigration world. We have to allow those people who have merit and those people who are going to be good for the marketplace or whatever the business owners in America need at this hour. And I agree with Kathy on that regard. But immigration has to go through the border. And that is why both parties are paralyzed. When Kathy is telling me that the Dems are working on this other bill, oh my God, I would love to work on them. But my question is, will they have the votes? And because we don't even know if the Dems are going to have the votes within their party. And then I'm trying to talk to my GOP boys and girls and tell them, hey, you need to help me with dignity, which is this new immigration plan that I just presented. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but that I think it could be a real answer to the problem, because it doesn't necessarily go through the famous path, because that's something else. You know, I'm a brown girl from the hood. I can speak for these people. And sometimes the politicians in Washington or the Hispanic leaders are not speaking for them. And why do I feel I can speak for them? Because I served them for 35 years. I was on the air. They were my viewers. I turned some of them into voters. So that's why I feel so engaged with this topic. And I have a deep sense of compromise in trying to find a solution, because I know what the people of the trenches are thinking. And the more we insist on this path, they want dignity. They want legality now, not in the future. Let's take them to heaven. They just want to work. And if you want me, I don't want to take any more time, but I can explain to you my dignity plan later on.
I want to come back to that in just a second, but I want to get Representative Manning's kind of reaction to that, because I may have heard something I think that you all might agree on, right? That you know, continuing to wait, continuing to delay solutions to this problem, failing to address legal status in a reasonable time frame is something that I suspect both of you agree shouldn't happen, right? So how do we find common ground there?
So, Neil, I want to go back to the question that you asked, because the question that you asked was, are we having conversations with our colleagues across the aisle about immigration? And I'm going to be very frank with you. We are not having conversations with our colleagues across the aisle. And that is because, number one, there has been such terrible polarization between the two parties. And add on top of that, my fourth day in Congress, we had an insurrection. I was in the gallery. I was in the House gallery. I was in the group that was the last group taken out of that gallery to safety. And then we sat for 4 hours waiting for the Capitol Police to get control of the Congress and to make sure that all of the insurrectionists were out of the building. So that insurrection left some real wounds and some lack of trust. That's number one reason why it is more difficult to have conversations with our colleagues. Number two, we're recovering in terms of the immigration issue. We're recovering from the assault of the last administration on immigrants. And I think we have to be quite honest about what happened under the last president, where immigrants were talked about in the most despicable terms. And that has left a lingering effect. And the news, I hate to say it, but the news builds on this by talking about what's going on at the border as though it is the biggest disaster to impact this country. We do need to deal with what's going on at the border. We also need to be helping the countries that these people are fleeing deal with their internal problems, deal with the impacts of hurricanes, deal with the impacts of gangs and violence, because that's one of the things that is driving people really in desperation to leave their country and try to seek a better opportunity in this country. The other thing we need to talk about is one of the reasons that people come here is because there are jobs that we don't have people to fill right now. So all of those issues, I think, need to be addressed if we're going to go forward and have, hopefully, we will be able to have conversations with our colleagues across the aisle. But right now, things are a little bit tense.
So, well, the good news is we're starting one of those conversations right now, and so let's dive in on how. Let's talk about some specifics, right? Because sometimes when we get into the meat of a problem, sometimes we can find some unexpected solutions. So, Representative Salazar, you mentioned the legislation that you're putting forward. Talk to us a little bit about that, and let's see if there's a place there. And then, Representative Manning, let's talk a little bit about the Citizenship Act that you're working on. And let's see if there's some area for some overlap. So Representative Salazar.
And yeah, that's the dignity plan. But I just want to tell you, just give you a couple of ideas on what Kathy was saying. The wounds, I get the wounds, and I'm sure they're there. But you know what? The guy who's picking up jalapeno peppers and who has been waiting for 15 years to have some type of legality is really not thinking about January 6th or about the former president or the former administration. He's still waiting. And he's been waiting for the Democrats, and he's been waiting for Clinton. He's been waiting for a long time. And he's really not thinking about anything else as to who is going to solve my problem. I just want dignity and legality. That's number one. Number two, I agree with you. We need a Marshall Plan. We need a Marshall Plan in Central America where we can go to Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador and tell those governments who are really not the people that have worked with us all the time, but we can say to them, we can help you, give incentives to the American companies to come and invest in your country and then absorb that labor force that is coming to the United States. Definitely, we need to pour millions of dollars into Central America. It's not that much money. And it would solve the problem because, I repeat, it would absorb that labor force that is trying to come to the United States because there are jobs. And because we have the business sector offering jobs to those people that are cheap and they are reliable. I want you to, I think it's very important to stress that they have been waiting for 35 years. And the last guy who gave them some type of legality was a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan, and he was a Republican. And they have been waiting for the Dems to give them what they have always offered. Because the thing is that the GOP hasn't said anything. It's that the Democrats are the ones trying to promise. And those promises never arrive. So that's why I'm trying to introduce something called the Dignity Plan. The Dignity Plan, that's all it does. It gives them dignity. And you know, I'm surrounded by illegals because I live in Miami. And I talk to them all the time. I have my little focus groups on every corner and I have asked them repeatedly if what I'm offering on the floor is what they want. And basically all I'm saying is that if you have been here for more than 5 years, if you have American children, if you have not committed a crime, if you're working and paying taxes, I'm going to give you dignity. I'm not talking about path to anything. I'm talking about path to have a dignified life, which is there's a visa called the Dignity Visa or whatever you want to call it. And every 3 or 4 years, and that's where I want my Democrat colleagues to come forward and tell me in which way we should negotiate this. They can come every 4 years and present themselves to the authorities, prove that they're decent members of society or this community, and then go back to work. And after 10 years, if they want to go into the redemption path, which is to become an American citizen. They can start all this paperwork and pay a fine and learn English and do some civic duty and then be an American citizen. In 1986, Ronald Reagan was the last guy who gave some type of legality to immigrants. You know how many people decided to apply for the blue passport, which is what I call it, to become Americans? 30%. So the illegals are waiting for something, or we're offering something specifically on the Democratic side. They're offering something that in reality they may want, but they want at the end. Now they want dignity. And the
good news about 86 is it was a divided government. So Republicans and Democrats had to come together to get it done, which is probably going to be the situation for the next time we get major immigration reform. Is probably going to have to be something that Republicans and Democrats come together and do. Representative Manning, you may have some reactions to that. I'd love to also hear your reactions on the Marshall Plan. That may be an area that begins common agreement, Marshall Plan for Central America. We've heard that from outside experts on both sides of the aisle, but also talk a little bit about the citizenship bill you're working on.
Sure. So, look, if my colleague can convince her colleagues to come on board an immigration reform bill, I would be thrilled. She's correct that in 1986, it was a Republican who was in charge when we had the last round of immigration reform. But the tide has changed dramatically. Over the past 4 years, it has been the Republicans who have demonized immigrants in a way that has frankly been startling to me. I think what if we were able to have conversations, what we would find is that the vast majority of Democrats are wholeheartedly in favor of immigration reform. And one of the things that my colleague said that sort of was a red flag when she said, these are people who are cheap and work hard. Now, one of the issues is we want to bring in immigrants, but we don't want to undercut the labor protections that we have, and that's a given. You know, we don't want to make the situation worse for people who are trying to earn a living wage. But that set aside, I do believe that the vast majority of Democrats are ready, willing, and able to have broad-scale immigration reform. Let me talk about, I think the impediment, as I said, I just want to say it again, to Representative Salazar, if she can convince her colleagues to get on board, I think we can come up with something that can get passed.
And I like that. So I'm going to convince my people, and then why don't you convince your guys to do some type of border reform? Because you know that what we're having right now, it's not sustainable for either administration, whether you have an independent president, a Democrat, or a Republican. It can't continue. So we got to fix the problem. And that is why, since '86, we haven't been able to have a bipartisan bill, because on my side, they don't believe, because they were burned in '86, that we're going to have order at the border. And that's legitimate.
So
what we're having right now.
The last bipartisan
in Central America.
So the last bipartisan bill that passed either the House or the Senate was passed out of the Senate. What was it, 7-8 years or so ago now? And that longer ago. But time flies. Because of coffee, it doesn't seem like that long ago. But it did combine that, right? So there were trade-offs. You know, the Democrats said that there was a lot of things around the border security that they didn't like. The Republicans said that there were a lot of things about the legalization part of it that they didn't like. But it was kind of the, you know, we all have to come together on this. Is that you both just mentioned it? Is that part of the, you know, listen, you know, each party has its priorities, and we have to figure out how to accommodate some of those priorities to be able to move forward. Is that part of the path ahead here?
There's no question we can get there. In my opinion, there's no question we can get a bill out of the House. The question is, can we get it out of the Senate? And you did ask me something that I haven't been able to address yet, but I want to jump in because I don't want to run out of time. Yeah. And that is the U.S. Citizenship Act that I have been working on, because that bill would address so many of the things that Representative Salazar has mentioned. And one of the things that I want to do is make an even stronger bill, because there's so many needs for workers up and down the skill level, from people who have hand skills, who we need to do some of the jobs where we currently have seasonal workers, but our farmers will tell you they need more workers. Our manufacturers will tell you they need more workers. But we also have a big need in the high skill areas. And I want to talk for a minute about H-1B visas. When I was practicing immigration law years ago, we had an annual cap of 300,000 H-1B visas a year. Today, there are only 65,000 H-1B visas that are issued a year. It's not nearly enough. So what we're hoping to do is get into this U.S. Citizenship Act an increase in the number of H-1B visas that could be issued every year. Now, there are people who will say one of the reasons there is hesitancy about H-1B visas is that there were employers who abused the H-1B visa and used it in a fraudulent way to bring people in and have current workers train people who are on H-1Bs to go take their jobs, do their jobs in other countries. That was a fraudulent use of H-1B visas. And I think if we expand the cap, but then have proper enforcement, that will solve some of those issues. The current U.S. Citizenship Act would include a bill to exempt people who have PhDs in the STEM areas from the H-1B visa cap. I think that's great, but I think we need to exempt people who have master's degrees in the STEM areas. And if I had my druthers, it would be people who get bachelor's degrees in the STEM areas, exempt them from the cap, because we are educating great students from all over the world at our wonderful U.S. universities, and then they're going home to their own countries to compete with us because we make it so difficult for them to stay here. So I would like to see that aspect of the visa. I'd also like to see us have an H-2B worker proposal in the U.S. Citizenship Act, and that would bring in more of the people who have, we don't call them low-skilled, we call them hand-skilled workers. I'd also like to see us expand the proposed bill to include more medical workers, particularly foreign doctors. We are in the midst of a pandemic. We have a shortage of doctors, particularly who are willing to work in medically underserved areas. Back when I was practicing, we had something called the J1 Conrad 30 option for foreign physicians. I'd like to see us put something like that in the bill. Also, we need to expand optional practical training. There are lots of things that we can put in this bill that will help our economy and help make us more competitive with the rest of the world, more competitive, for example, with Canada. So we can add things and make this the kind of comprehensive immigration bill that we need. It's just going to take more conversation and work across the aisle.
Look, man, I am glad you got that in, because we would have run out of time not getting to the visa issues, which are an important part of this, but sometimes get overlooked. Representative Salazar, I know you've thought a lot about visa issues and the pathways that people come in, either temporarily for work or sometimes temporarily in converting to permanent. Do you have thoughts on kind of a policy approach, either on the specific visa categories or overall?
I agree with Kathy. I think that we need the marketplace. We need to let the marketplace decide what it needs. Not everybody that is going to be coming here is going to be an engineer or a doctor. We need people picking up jalapeno peppers and berries and go to the slaughterhouses in Iowa. And right now, the shortage of people that we have. We have more jobs than hands. So let the marketplace, but let's do it in an orderly fashion. That's why I said at the beginning, we need to reform immigration laws, H-1B, H-2Bs, all the other visas. We need to fix the asylum process, because that's another big problem, that people are abusing the asylum process, and people that do not have a legitimate asylum claim are then taking the opportunity away from those who are really being tortured in one of these rogue countries. So we also have to penetrate into that. But when it comes to the business aspect of the whole immigration process, I agree with her. The marketplace will determine. And obviously, we don't want anyone abusing the system, but there are so many intelligent Indian and Chinese and Pakistanis and people that are coming, students that are coming from other countries that would love to stay in the United States and help their employable skill and be able to use that employable skill in our markets or in our economy, and they can't. So you see, everything is warped.
Well, visas is certainly an issue that we talk about a lot with our members at the U.S. Chamber, but also our state and local federation partners. So maybe this is a good opportunity to bring Peter Daniel in from the North Carolina Chamber, who has a question for you, Representative Manning. And then we're going to go to the Florida Chamber for a question for you, Representative Salazar. So let's bring Peter in for his question if we can.
Hello, my name is Peter Daniel. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the North Carolina Chamber. I first want to thank Neil Bradley for inviting the Chamber to participate in this important discussion. I also want to thank Congresswoman Manning for her service to the state and for also participating in this event with the Chamber. Immigration is a divisive issue, with some on the left focusing more on different pathways to citizenship, and some on the right focusing more on security. How do you see both sides compromise on a solution that provides a more predictable talent supply for our job creators?
So I think some of the things, well, number one, as I said, we need to have conversations with people across the aisle. Now, that's number one. Number two, we've got to tone down the rhetoric that we hear from politicians, but we hear from newscasters about the disaster that's supposedly happening as a result of having so many undocumented immigrants in this country. One thing that people don't know, the vast majority of people who are here who are not properly documented did not walk across a border. They flew to this country from other countries on temporary visas and just overstayed and have never left. So the problem is not just at the border. The problem is that our immigration system is in desperate need of reform. And to be fair, we need more funding to go to the immigration department so that visas can be processed on a timely basis. I think we've sort of outlined different proposals that should be put into a broad immigration reform bill. And it seems like if Maria and I were able to sit down and talk through this, we could probably come up with a proposal that at least she and I would agree with. We don't know if our colleagues would agree.
All right. I want to go to my good friend, Mark Wilson, the president and CEO of the Florida Chamber, who has a question for you, Representative Salazar. Mark.
Well, hey, Neil, I just wanted to say thank you from Florida. As you know, Neil, I'm Mark Wilson, the president and CEO of Florida's Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank the entire U.S. Chamber. I think this conversation about common grounds is something that's long overdue in our country. And I want to applaud you and the team at the U.S. Chamber for including diverse opinions on such important issues as this. Also, Representative Salazar, congratulations on your victory, first of all. Also, thank you for jumping right in. We need bipartisan solutions to some of our country's toughest and most challenging political and policy issues. And immigration happens to be one of those issues. And we've needed common sense, common ground, and bipartisan action for a long time on immigration. And so my question for you, Representative Salazar, would be, your dignity plan that you have, can you share with local businesses all over the country, how does your plan actually help businesses and how does it move America forward? So thank you.
Thanks to you. And I think I just wanted to, I'm about to answer your question. I think that I wanted to congratulate Kathy because she's been honest, and it's laudable to be honest when it comes to politics. It's hard to convince people on both sides of the aisle. I'm sure that she's having this type of conversations with her colleagues, and I'm having them with my GOP people. But if we don't tackle the immigration topic, we do not know what's going to happen in this country. And in my case, I'm a brown girl. I know them well. I'm first generation American. I worked in Spanish for 35 years. I communicate with them all the time, and I see their plight. I see their suffering. Like I said, I live in Miami. I'm surrounded by illegals, people that have been here for 25 years, people that have American children, people that don't know what else to do. And that's why I jumped right into it. Everybody told me, oh my God, immigration, who really wants to touch that? Well, I do, because I think that's why I ran and that's why I won. And so I commend you, Kathy, for being so honest. And when you're asking me about, I think what has happened in the last 35 years has been a transfer of wealth from the business class, from the working American working class to the business class, because the entrepreneurs were able to profit from this cheap labor that we need. And it's not that I have anything against the entrepreneurs or the business community in this country, is that I think they need help. They need help because I'm sure that every business owner would love to have people working that are legal and that they are paying their proper taxes, their Social Security, and have as many hands as they need. If I go to Homestead, and I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about, people that are picking up the tomatoes, they can't find anybody to do that. Or the Origins in Central Florida, So it's the market, as I said a few minutes ago, the market should be the one dictating what it needs and what type of jobs and employable skills they need. And that's why we need to give them. And if we cannot find them among the American population, then we can always import them in that orderly fashion. That's why I'm saying we got to fix the border.
So it does feel like it, and listening to both of you, you each talk about it a little differently, but you both have the same passion for solving what you see as a broken system, right? And maybe the approaches are a little bit different, in terms of the mechanics of it. But these don't feel like insurmountable obstacles to a listener. It just feels like it's the difficult conversations that you're both having right here, right now, and that on behalf of the chamber, I want to kind of commend you for being willing to just jump into the middle of it to try to help us bring resolution. I think one of the things that our audience is going to want to know, and I want to go to two quick audience questions that I think hit on this well, but I want you to think about both of these questions in the context of asking the audience, everyone who's tuning in, is how can we help you? Because our success is going to depend on your success, and you're going to hear this, I think, in both Tracy, who's the head of the Overland Park Chamber of Commerce out there in Kansas, and the question that she poses. And if we can bring that up real quick for our Congresswoman. It seems that workforce gaps offer real opportunities to coalesce around meaningful immigration solutions. How can we keep messaging and strategies focused on solutions to bring the talent and workforce businesses need without the political rhetoric bogging down the issue? And Mary Miller over at Jancoa Janitorial Services has a similar type question, and I'll focus on the best part of it. How can we, and this is an employer who employs a diverse team from over 30 countries, how can we best attract and support immigration with the changes our country has experienced? So maybe I can ask each of you to take those two questions, and Representative Manning, we'll start with you, but with an eye to how can the audience help you?
So I think the best way you can help is gather together your stories and call your members of Congress and call your senators, particularly call your senators, and tell them what your experience is. Tell them what kind of people you're having trouble hiring. Assure them that you are paying proper wages, you're paying the taxes, you're providing the kinds of benefits that American workers deserve. Because if the argument is we need to undercut American workers and have cheaper labor, that's never going to fly. But I actually believe that we were heading into a labor shortage before the pandemic, and I think there's good reason to back up the need to change our immigration system with real world examples. But the only way that we're going to do this is if the members of the people who are on this call and the members of the business community call their elected officials and explain what their needs are, and that you're supportive of the overall comprehensive immigration reform that we really need in this country.
Representative Salazar, advice for the audience today.
Exactly the same thing that she said, that Kathy said. You find out who's your representative, find out their phone number, call them and tell them that you need either the Dignity Act to be supported, or to pass the House of Representatives, or that you want an immigration reform law that you need, and you state what your needs are, whether you need more workers or whatever you need, but that if it's related to immigration, that's what your local representative and your federal representative needs to know about. By 2035, 35% of the United States labor force will come from immigrants, because we're not producing enough people to fill those jobs. When Kathy says before the pandemic, during the last Trump year, we had 6 million more jobs than hands. The pandemic obviously compromised that figure, but in the next couple of years, that's going to be the case once again. So we don't have enough people to fill those jobs, and the jobs are growing. So that will only compromise our growth, our GDP. It will only compromise the businesses that you guys represent. So that's why immigration is central to the to our well-being as a country and our future growth as an economy.
Well, you know, we're already hearing at the U.S. Chamber from our members. We're already hearing from localities across the country who are already experiencing that workforce shortage. Representative Salazar, that you talked about pre-pandemic, it's already here. You know, even though we have, you know, still about 9-10 million Americans displaced because of the pandemic, in certain sectors, they have open jobs that they can't get filled. I want to zero in on this because you both said it, and I think it deserves repeating for the audience. And too often, and even today, we kind of began the conversation the way we talk about immigration nationally, and the way we hear about it on the media. But you both recommended that the audience talk to their elected representatives about the local impact. And you know, we tend to focus on these national things, but really it's talking about how it impacts our communities, right? And thinking about it from that and translating that to our elected representatives. Is that, you're both nodding, so I think that's the message that the audience who cares about getting this done needs to take away today.
Hound them, persecute them, hound them, call them over and over again. That's the only way that Kathy's party and my party will wake up and want to work together, because that's what I really think we should need to do. There's nothing, I will not be able to do dignity without her and her party. And the same way, it's the same thing on the other side. They need the Dems, we need the Dems, and they need the Republicans.
And Neil, let me add, I want to add two more things. Number one, I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to tone down the rhetoric when we talk about immigrants. And the rhetoric over the past 4 years when describing immigrants has been appalling. We've got to change the rhetoric. We've got to talk about people like they're people. And I agree, they all deserve dignity. So that's number one. Number two, I've had several conversations over the last 2 weeks with business groups that I've met with to talk about a wide variety of issues. And when they've raised the issue of labor shortage, the first go-to is, we've got a labor shortage because of all the stimulus checks and because people are getting unemployment benefits. And I said, you know what? If your labor shortage only started recently, I'm willing to listen to that. But when I push, what they're saying is, well, actually, we've had this labor shortage that started well before the pandemic, well before the shutdowns. So I think it's important for business people, whether you like the money that's in the American Recovery Act or you don't like it, that's not really the point right now. The point is, we've had needs for additional labor that predate the pandemic. And when you talk to your elected officials, if you focus on the unemployment benefits or the stimulus checks, you're missing the point. This is a much larger issue. And because if it's only about the unemployment benefits, that's going to end once we get control of this pandemic. If what we're talking about is a larger issue, which I believe it is, then let's talk about it as the larger issue that it is, and don't blame it on the Recovery Act. We're talking about a labor shortage, need for workers that predated the pandemic. So I would encourage people, when they talk to their elected officials, to focus on that big picture issue, not what's happening right now, because a lot of people are staying home to take care of kids who are not in school, or elderly parents that can't get the care they need because of the pandemic.
So we have about a minute left, and I want to conclude with one question back to both of you. When I was a little kid, I used to go with my granddad to the coffee shop, and he and all the retired guys his age would sit around talking about all the political things. It was my first exposure to politics, and man, did they argue. They were Republicans and Democrats, and probably a few things that we don't have good labels for. But the one thing they were a pretty optimistic bunch, even as they complained about Washington elected representatives. I think both of you have given us a reason to be optimistic about the ability to solve some of these problems. But I want to ask you, are you optimistic despite all the troubles, despite the difficulties? you think we can come together and eventually, not saying when, but begin to solve some of these problems, beginning with immigration? Representative Salazar, I'll go to you first.
I am an eternal optimist. You see, I was the daughter of political refugees. I'm first generation American. My parents came when they were 25 years old, and they had $5 in their pocket because Fidel Castro promised that he was going to create paradise, and in reality, he just created a nightmare. And this country allowed my parents to come and to stand on this beautiful platform called the American Agenda and enjoy the American exceptionality. So that's why I ran to be a United States representative, because I believe that there is no better country to live and to prosper than this one. That is why we need to take care of the system, and we need to take care of whomever comes in and those people who leave, but those people who come and those people that want to come and be part of the American dream, and do it in an orderly fashion. Because I am Cuban American and I have those experiences with socialism, I am very much a free marketeer, egalitarian. I think everybody should have the same opportunity and for them to create whatever results they can, but having always the same opportunity. That's the same opportunity I would like to give to those who have been here without papers. It's true that they broke the law, but they have helped the system. They have helped the American economy. And that's why I want to give them some type of dignity. And I do believe that at some point, hopefully within the next 2 years, we're going to have an answer to this immense problem called immigration, starting with the border and finishing with the H-1B and H-2 visas. So yeah, I think that with people like Kathy within the Democratic Party, there's definitely hope for us to be able to work together.
Representative Manning, do you share the optimism, or you strike me as an optimist as well?
I'm optimistic for a couple of different reasons. Number one, my great-grandparents were immigrants who came to this country fleeing religious persecution. And they came here because this country was the land of opportunity and allowed them to build a better life. And we continue to be the country that attracts immigrants. And we have to keep in mind, I would much rather be in the country that everybody's desperate to get into than the country that people are desperate to leave. We have enormous ingenuity. We have an enormous innovation. We have the best colleges and universities in the world. We will continue to be innovators that create new jobs that need more workers. And I'm also optimistic because we have in the White House a president who has determined that we need to catapult this country forward by not only by getting control of this pandemic and getting us back to work, but also by creating the infrastructure that has been neglected for so many years. And so I'm optimistic because I think if we can all work together, we can continue to have the promise that is the American dream that has attracted so many immigrants to this country for generations.
Well, I have to tell you, I don't know if they get online streaming services in heaven, but if they do, my grandfather would have enjoyed this conversation and would have been really appreciative of both of your answers, as I am, and as are my colleagues at the U.S. Chamber, the Florida Chamber, and the North Carolina Chamber. Listen, the work that you're both doing is hard, but if it wasn't important, if it wasn't necessary, then we wouldn't be here today. And I suspect neither of you would be putting in the toil and the sweat and the blood that it takes to kind of move these issues forward. I just want to tell you that on behalf of the Chamber, as you all work to bring consensus within your parties, across party aisles, throughout Washington, the U.S. Chamber has your back, and we're ready to jump in because we're excited about working with you all and your colleagues to begin solving some of these problems. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is an incredibly busy schedule to join us today and to share your reflections. To our audience, thank you for joining in to this latest edition of Common Grounds. I hope you'll join us again next time. We're over a cup of coffee and another Republican leader and another Democratic leader, we'll tackle one of the hot button controversial issues that all of us are just hoping to see solutions around. Thanks so much for joining us.